Hello.
Hi, Benyamin. How are
We
you doing?
good, Laura. How are you? We are live. I mean, we're always live. I mean, I
Always
hate when
live and
people say that when
forward.
they say like, no, it's like
24/7.
I'm report. I'm reporting live from. I mean, I understand you were
Yes.
not dead when you were reporting this.
Yes. Reporting alive and well from New York City and the Virginia area, West Virginia
West
area.
Virginia area, yeah. But I will be in New York next week, so maybe I will. Maybe we'll get a chance to see each other in person.
Yeah.
Um, Happy National Bagels and Lox Day. How are you celebrating today?
I feel like I should have a bagel and lox at some point, but I don't. It's kind of a heavy lunch thing, so maybe bagel and lox for dinner. That's weird, but maybe I'll
Oh, I do
celebrate.
breakfast for dinner all the time. Yeah.
Maybe I'll celebrate a day later. I am a big bagels and lox fan. Obviously, everything bagel, New York style, fluffy. Um, did you see the travesty in Congress? They are cutting bagels into quarters and doling them out.
What?
These tiny little slices. Yeah. Rep Dan
What's going on
Goldman,
there?
obvious member
Yeah.
of the tribe, representing an area
Representing.
representing an area of New York with a lot of Jewish constituents. In Brooklyn, is the first and only member of the Bagel Caucus. Yes, real thing. So apparently, lines were stretching down the hallway um,
Oh my
as
gosh.
excited congressional staffers were lining up for a paltry quarter of bagel shipped in from Brooklyn. Are bagels in DC really that awful that you've got to wait online like that?
There's this whole myth about, New York, the water in New York makes the bagels so much better.
Right.
I've never taste tested, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Um,
What's your favorite bagel?
oh my gosh. I mean, it's got to be an everything bagel. But Montreal bagels are a little flatter, and
Mm-hmm.
I prefer the like floofier texture, for lack of a better word, of New York bagels. I also don't say no to like an egg bagel or something like that. What about you?
Interesting. Everything is a good default. Yeah, that's a good default for me. And I like onion and chive, cream cheese on it. Gives it a little bit of a kick.
That's
Yeah.
good. Have you had a
So
jalapeno bagel before we
no,
switch
I
to
don't like spice.
you don't like
I don't
spice?
like hot. I don't like spicy and hot. Does that make me? I don't know what that makes me.
Makes you an Ashkenazi Jew, Benjamin. That's
I mean, I was
okay.
gonna say it makes me. um, what else is going on this week? I actually saw. I went to a concert. I barely go out these days, but I got dressed and went to a concert this week
Wow.
in
I mean,
a
you do
small
have like
town.
45 chickens, so it makes sense. But
Yeah, it's a lot of animal chores around here. But I went to a small town north of Pittsburgh called Zelienople. It sounds like a Polish shtetl.
sounds like
Zelienople,
a shtetl or a
Pennsylvania.
Dr. Seuss town. Yes, it does.
Yeah, I should have done research. I have no idea why it's called that. But Zelienople. I'm sure someone in the comment section, if they know what it is, can let us know. Um, Mandy Patinkin, the actor from Homeland, and he's super popular these days. Him and his wife are super cute on TikTok and social media. But I don't know how many people know this, but Mandy, between TV and movie projects, likes to do concerts where he sings Broadway show tunes. He loves Stephen Sondheim songs, and he also does a bunch of Yiddish songs. So it was pretty cool. It was
Why
like
not,
a
right?
pretty intimate. Yeah, and he's good at it. I mean, he's really good. He did some funny. They were all like pretty funny though. Like he did Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious in Yiddish,
Yes, a
which is
popular Yiddish song, of course.
that they used to sing in the shtetl. And the funny thing, he actually sang "White Christmas" by Irving Berlin. He sang that in Yiddish, which was pretty funny. But yeah, it was great. It was a small, like it was less than 300 people. It was a small, intimate theater. So I think everyone who was there um, really had a blast. And I got to see him. And I got to take a selfie at the end. Um, so that was the highlight of my week. What was the highlight of your week, or what
That's
is going
very
to be the
exciting.
highlight of your week?
Well, the highlight of my week so far on Monday, I went to the annual kosher food and wine experience at
Oh,
Chelsea
yeah.
Piers, working on a big roundup of wines for Passover. But it's just such a cool experience to have, all these Israeli wineries, French wineries, kosher wineries from all over the world. And they had really good food also. So can't beat a day of trying new things. But this afternoon, on a less fun but serious note, following Doug Emhoff and Deborah Lipstat's trip to Poland and Germany, they are actually going to the United Nations today to release some bullet points of a plan to combat anti-Semitism. From the rough outline I've seen, like these things go, it's kind of light on specifics, big on emotional language. So, I don't have high expectations that we're going to come out with with a very concrete plan. But as I said last week, I think the amount of emphasis that the administration is at least placing on talking about this issue, and that the UN now is hosting something, I think it's worth celebrating. So I will be there today and reporting back on what goes down. So that might be exciting. We'll see.
So you started the week with kosher wine tasting and ending it with the UN summit on anti-Semitism.
Exactly. The week is young. It's only Thursday. We'll see what happens. I'm from Missouri, and the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl, so maybe that will end up being the highlight. So
hopefully, yeah. Unless you're from Philadelphia, in which case
I was actually born outside of Philly, but my loyalties lie where my family lives. But we have an anniversary coming up today or this week of a Jew not from Missouri returning to his ancestral place.
Well, let's get to the news. Let's talk about some news items that happened this week that we've been covering at the Forward. We like to do this kind of on Thursdays, kind of look back at the week and talk about some of the fun or crazy stories that we've been reporting on. And I think on Monday we reported on this week is the 100th anniversary. That's always good when you have like a centennial anniversary. It's the 100th anniversary of the one and only time when Albert Einstein visited Israel. Of course, back then it wasn't called. This is February of 1923. It was
Mandatory Palestine,
MP.
Yeah.
And yeah, he went. He was there for about 12 days. I think he was there from February 2nd to February 14th. And I mean, the trip really left an impression on him. He was many people don't know this, but Einstein was one of the founders of Hebrew University.
Oh, that's
and he remained on the board of governors until his death at Hebrew University. And as a matter of fact, and when he was in the States, he was always raising money for Hebrew University and other causes in Israel, other Zionist causes of the time. And in 1952, I think, in the fall of 1952, the president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, died. And Chaim Weizmann was a fellow scientist. Him and Einstein were friends. And when Chaim Weizmann died, David Ben-Gurion, the prime minister at the time, was looking for a new president of Israel. And he had the great idea of asking Einstein to be the president of Israel, which he did. And he formally, he sent an ambassador over to Einstein's house in Princeton and formally asked him to be the president of Israel. And Einstein, as anyone who knows history, politely declined. He never became the president of Israel. But he talks about, and we put this in our article about the 100th anniversary of this trip, he talks about how, Israel and the Jewish people is like the strongest connection he's had with any group in his life. So check it out if you haven't seen it. There's some really cool black and white photos of Einstein visiting all these different schools in Tel Aviv and Haifa, and it's just it's pretty cool. Yeah,
fascinating. And
what else is going on?
You are a resident Einstein expert. I believe you have a book coming out this summer on Einstein.
What do they call that? Log rolling when you're promoting your own thing?
I don't know, but I'm promoting it. So I'm giving you the opportunity.
Yeah, I wrote a book about the modern relevance of Einstein. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it on future episodes, but it comes out July 18th. And connected to Israel, I spent a lot of time researching this book at the Albert Einstein Archives, which are located at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Nice. It's the largest repository of Einstein information. They have 85,000 documents. They have his Nobel Prize there. They have the original theory of relativity there. And so I spent a lot of time there doing research for my book. So there is an Israel connection there. Speaking of Israel, what else are you following this week, Laura?
In much less erudite news, Leonardo DiCaprio, famous lover of women under 25, is reportedly possibly dating a 19-year-old, yes, teen. Someone in their 40s, late 40s, is dating a teen, perhaps. Eden Polani, who's an Israeli Instagram influencer and model. Hey Alma, a publication, Jewish publication, wrote a piece basically saying, knock it off, Leonardo DiCaprio. We've covered him over the years. He's invested in Israeli companies. I think he actually owns a house in Israel. So also a fan of the Jewish state. But leave the kids alone, Leo. Knock it off. That's that. That's all I have to say about that. But back to anti-Semitism. A famous podcaster. Yeah. Did you have more to say about Leonardo DiCaprio's choices?
No, nothing more to say. I don't want to put my mouth.
Joe Rogan, famous podcaster, is at it again with some spicy, controversial comments on an episode released February 4th. He was discussing how Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat from Minnesota, was voted out of her Foreign Affairs Committee assignment by House Republicans, citing, among other things, her alleged anti-Semitism, which she has apologized for when she, in 2019, tweeted, "It's all about the Benjamins," was promptly called out and denounced by a bunch of folks, including our then opinion editor. But Joe Rogan decided that despite Omar apologizing for this clearly anti-Semitic statement that it's all about the Benjamins for Jews, he said that statement was not anti-Semitic and, quote, "the idea that Jewish people aren't into money is ridiculous. That's like saying Italians aren't into pizza. That's effing stupid." But he used the adult version. What do you think, Benyamin?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Joe Rogan says something controversial, is not news. Joe Rogan always says something controversial. And there's a tension I always feel when we give oxygen to people, controversial people who say, I know earlier today in our company Slack, someone sent something that Nick Fuentes, a neo-Nazi, said something crazy. And it's like, okay, like, there's a million people who don't say something crazy, and then we're always focusing on the one person who does say something crazy. But what do you think about it?
I mean, the problem I have with Joe Rogan is that he speaks very confidently and sounds persuasive and plays very fast and loose with the truth and with his analogies. As someone who is both Italian and Jewish, the idea that Italians are into pizza has not systemically been used to justify the murder of Italians or, promote dangerous stereotypes about Italians. So his analogy, first of all, was just bad. Right. But second of all, when someone has already apologized for an anti-Semitic statement, for you to then say, no, this was actually, Jews are into money, and double down on something that even the original author of the tweet wouldn't, give it a break. But, it highlights something a little disturbing to me, which is that I think we're seeing anti-Semitic tropes being a lot more common across, I wouldn't even call him an ideological person, but just entering back into the mainstream discourse much more than I think in the decades after the Holocaust that we saw. So it's not great. Particularly as, Twitter is falling apart. Its content moderation is, perhaps existent, but we will see what happens.
Speaking of anti-Semitism and apologies, I was struck by a story this week that got a lot of attention on our website about the NBA star Kyrie Irving, who, just a quick recap, in late October, he posted a link on his social media to an anti-Semitic movie. And he was suspended, and he apologized. And this week, flash forward 3 months, he was traded. He asked to be traded. He was on the Brooklyn He asked to be traded, and he was the Dallas Mavericks. And people were interviewing him, and while they were doing research into him, they realized that he had deleted the apology that he posted back in November when he was apologizing. He deleted that apology. So some people were saying he unapologized, and reporters asked him about it on Tuesday at a press conference. And he said, he's like, listen, I delete stuff all the time from my social media. And then he also said something interesting. A lot of my family, he didn't say a lot. He goes, I have some Jewish members in my family. I wasn't sure if he was referring to, Black Hebrew Israelites, or if he was referring to, other kinds of Jewish people.
Yeah.
He didn't really make it clear. I mean, we just talked about before with the Ilan Omar. It's like, what happens when you unapologize?
He's never really seemed like terribly contrite, as opposed to, last week we talked about some other sports folks who have apologized. And I mean, he also is dealing with, he asked to be traded from his team. So I think from his perspective, not that I know what's in his brain, but I would imagine that he feels like this has been a big action and is sick of talking about it and wants to just play basketball. But unfortunately, that's not really how it works when you make a, racist or inflammatory statement. So I don't know. It's frustrating that he doesn't seem to be contrite at all. But what can you do? I mean, there's another option after someone, does something like this, which I think gets us to our next news item.
Yeah.
But Nick Cannon made some anti-Semitic statements a few years ago and has since done a total about face, done a lot of engagement with the Jewish community, and even started a podcast with the CEO of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, titled "To Hate or Not to Hate," which honestly seems like a terrible name because the answer for many people will be yes, to hate. So maybe we'll workshop that one, but it's astounding. I mean, what do you think?
Listen, to his credit and to the ADL's credit, we have this spectrum here. We were talking about Kyrie Irving, who sort of apologized and then actually removed the apology. We talked last week about this other NBA star who felt bad for what he did, and he's been going and speaking at Hillel and Chabad on campus. And then you have Nick Cannon, who has gone on this apology tour and has become friends in the last few years. The incident was back in 2020. And in the last 2-3 years, he's become friends with Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL. And I think it's great that they're launching this podcast together. I'm a big fan of interfaith dialogue. And so, you and I are two Jews talking about the news, but, I think I would totally listen to an interfaith dialogue about the news, and so I think I'm going to be tuning in to that. I'll add it to my podcast queue, I think, or at least I'll give it an episode. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, let's see. But yeah, I don't know. There's so many podcasts out there, and it does seem like an unlikely combo of people. But who knows? Maybe you're right. Maybe this interfaith dialogue is not just to be confined to religious leaders. But that's our brief news items.
That's our wrap up around the world in Jewish news, and this is the time in the program where we would like to invite a guest to talk about something a little more in depth. And today we are joined by Dr. Hannah Lebovits from Texas. She is a contributing columnist at The Forward and an assistant professor of public affairs at the University of Texas in Arlington. And she wrote a new op-ed on The Forward this week, which got a lot of attention. And the headline is, I think it was a pretty clicky headline, I don't know, Laura, if you came up with it, but the headline was, "I teach on a campus without Hillel or Chabad. My Jewish students yearn for connection, not Israeli politics." And she talks a lot in there about how in a campus like hers at the University of Texas Arlington, there's no Chabad, there's no Hillel, and there are a lot of pro-Israel groups on campus. Maybe there's some anti-Israel groups too, but the point of the article was that this is kind of the only exposure that these Jewish students are getting is, pro-Israel, anti-Israel, and not really getting the plethora of other Jewish experience, Shabbat meals or, whatever. So we wanted to have her on today to talk about that. Let's see if we have her on.
I think so.
Oh,
Hi, Anna.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
thanks
of
for
course.
joining us.
My pleasure.
Is Dallas or Austin is freezing right now as New York
Dallas is warming up. I do have to say, I feel like I'm connected to a couple of these points you've been making today because, like, our team, the Mavericks, like they're the ones who just got Kyrie.
Yeah.
So that's
Right.
like an interesting.
Your problem now.
Yeah. And my campus is in Arlington, which is where the Cowboys stadium is, and there's a lot of like talk now because the Cowboys aren't going to the Super Bowl, and so everyone's like mad about that. I don't know. There's a lot of sports stuff that happens up here in Texas. I was not fully prepared for that when I came down here, but Dallas is warming up, thank God, and kids are back in school after being off for a week because of an inch of ice.
Oh wow.
So, yeah, it's dramatic over here in Texas every time it gets cold. But thank you so much for having me, and I'd love to talk more about the piece.
Yeah, Hannah, I'm curious what prompted you to write this, whether there was something specific or just you've been in this campus environment for a while now and are noticing a dearth of what your students need.
Yeah, so I've been on college campuses for so many years at this point, undergrad, master's, PhD, and now as a professor. So it's been a long time for me. And having not ever been in a specifically Jewish studies oriented program, I can't say that my campus experience was ever oriented towards Jewish identity on its own naturally. Like my area of specialty has always been political science, public policy, public affairs. These are not typical things that Jewish women or Orthodox Jewish women usually fall into when it comes to academia. We're typically more in the humanities. So being in the social sciences and being in this space, I never really had a hard time thinking about myself as a Jew and as a scholar because they were just different items, like my Jewish life was fulfilled outside of campus and my academic life on campus. Now, as a professor on the other side of that, interacting with students, I do see a lot of students who think of their life more wholly and like as like not HOLY, but in a more whole perspective. And they think about like, hey, I'm on here, I'm at school here, I also want other needs of mine, social needs, to be filled. And after a couple years of thinking about this, I've been looking around. I want to get more involved in, potentially supporting especially Jewish students on my campus. And there just aren't really a lot of options for what the students say that they want. And particularly schools like mine, where there's no on-campus Hillel, there's no on-campus Chabad. There are a lot of on-campus Christian religious organizations. That's true across the Bible Belt. But also just not really a lot of support for students who are looking to engage with religion as a material item, not as, so like there's, Bible groups, or there are fraternities that are Christian oriented, but the kind of things that Jewish students look for, like things like a Shabbat meal, that just doesn't really exist in what like student services are. And so I was looking into, bringing in an organization or contracting with an organization, and I started to look around at these organizations that just do site like scatter site services, so they're not on campus, but they'll just kind of help with something, and it was overwhelmingly Israel oriented. And in my college, and actually I think this is common in a lot of places and something I'd also like to write about in the future, but we have a especially complicated situation because so many of our students are international students, and many of our Jewish students actually come from countries that are not safe environments for Jews. And they come to the US and when they come to our campus, it's actually the first time that they can potentially engage with their Jewish identity. I've
Wow.
had the opportunity to inform many people that they are in fact Jewish, that they do have Jewish connections. And it's come out of conversations that I've had with them being open about my Jewish identity. And they'll say something like, oh yeah, like my mom's Jewish, but I'm not Jewish. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Let's talk about that some other
Yeah.
time. And so that it's really complicated. You have a lot of folks from Texas also who even they're Americans, but they're from small towns in Texas where they didn't identify as Jewish, or where their parents or grandparents told them, never talk about being Jewish. Being Jewish isn't something that's safe for us. And they come now to a college campus where they do have the opportunity to engage with that identity. So it's not just that they're not looking for Israel. They're also, so many of them just don't even know what being Jewish is, or it's their first opportunity to really think about that.
I love that last line, the kicker on the article. You wrote more pickles, less politics. So I think that kind of encapsulates. Can you talk about that a little? It kind of encapsulates your argument.
So I think that when because I have my own limits in terms of what I talk about as a Jewish person, as an Orthodox Jew, a lot of my expression of Judaism is material life, talking about taking off time for Jewish holidays, talking about my kids going to Jewish schools, talking about how I'm not going to respond to an email between Friday night and Saturday evening. So I live a lot of my life materially Jewishly, talking about Shabbat meals, interactions with synagogues, particularly in what I teach, because so much of it has to do with, public-private partnerships, like nonprofits providing public services. We'll talk about faith-based organizations. So much of what I talk about is material Jewish life. And I find that that's what really interests a lot of students. They want to feel Jewish, act Jewish, eat Jewish. They want to be surrounded by this material, physical Jewish life. And Israel just isn't that for them. And honestly, politics isn't that for them, which is funny because it's a public affairs, public policy program, so you think that that's what drives people, but that's not real to a lot of them. It's something that I almost think they're inundated with a lot of it, that it doesn't feel like an identity to them. It feels like just an additional conversational point. I also think that, especially again, going back to the international students, it's too complex of a space for them to navigate, especially on their own and in a new way where they can now engage with it. And it's not fair to them to expect them to be able to do that. So it's much more comfortable for them to say, hey, being Jewish means having a nice meal on Friday night, or being Jewish means, spending time with your family over these periods of days where we get together with friends and we pray and we sing and we, all of these other things. That's actually a lot easier for them to consume and to engage with. They want that. They're really looking for that. And I don't think my students are unique. And this was part of the article too, is that whatever data we do have on what Jewish college students want, not the organizations that represent them, but they themselves, says that the highest ranked items that they want are these kind of cultural identity, material experiences, and not political action.
Yeah. I think something related. The forward covers all the time, and I think all think very deeply about the conversation around anti-Semitism. And in addition to Israel on college campuses, there's a lot of headlines about, anti-Semitism on campus, whether or not students feel safe on campus. Do you get the sense that Jewish students and faculty feel generally safe on campus being Jewish? Is, the issue dramatically overblown? What's your read on that?
So I get the sense that, with most things, it's very geographic based. I think that if you're on a campus in a particular kind of, state or city or environment in which these are topics that are discussed, you're going to have a lot more heated discussions. You're going to have a lot more you're going to have a lot more students who feel they're being attacked, even when perhaps they're not. And I don't mean to disregard anyone's lived experience, but you'll have a lot of folks who, let's say, like me, who grew up in, going to Jewish day schools, fully in a almost like bubble of Jewish support for Israel and Jewish support for a lot of Jewish causes. And the first time in their entire lives that they encounter anyone who says, you know, well, I think this about Israel, and it's a negative statement, it feels like you're being attacked because you don't necessarily have the skills to even understand what someone's saying. You don't know how to engage in that dialogue or those discussions. I will say on my campus, the experience for a lot of Jewish students, and I think this is similar in a lot of places where there just aren't that many Jewish students, there isn't that much institutional Jewish life. Most of what we encounter that might necessarily be negative is just ignorance. Like it's just people just don't know things. They don't know how to say things. They don't know what they're talking about. And so I typically, I mean, and I've encountered things that I think other people would consider anti-Semitism that I just consider ignorance, and I try to encounter it with grace and explain things. But I do think that, and I know there have been other articles in the Forward recently about this topic, we do have to balance like just what is a normal level of interaction, even negative interaction, that's not anti-Semitism, but is just people interacting and not knowing how to discuss a conversation in a thoughtful and constructive way. And sometimes we jump to like, that was an anti-Semitic statement or that was an anti-Semitic interaction. And maybe it's just like someone who doesn't know how to be kind or socially like proper. Like, you know, there are just experiences. I've had experiences where like, so technically according to like administrative codes for hiring, being Jewish is considered being a part of a minority group after the Trump administration shifts some of these federal administrative regulations. So when we do like a diversity check for our faculty and we say like, how many white women do we have? Even though I am a white woman, I'm a white Jewish woman. So I'm technically considered in like the minority group population. And so we had a discussion about this one time amongst faculty. And one faculty member was just like, I can't believe that. I can't believe Hannah's not considered white. Like, do people even know she's Jewish? Like, just, he went on this whole tirade. And I just looked at him and was like I pitied him, like, because it just wasn't a proper thing to say amongst all your colleagues. And it was just like a strange for all of us. Yeah. And we all just sort of looked around and I was like, are you asking me how much Yiddish I use in class? Like, I was like trying to figure out what he meant.
Yeah.
Like, do people know she's Jewish? Do her students know, you know? It was a very strange interaction, but I wouldn't say that I experienced anti-Semitism. I would just say I experienced a weird social interaction that just this person shared a little too much about their inside voice should have been saying. Yeah. They did a little too much outside voice, but I think other people would consider that to be like, you know, anti-Semitic and something that they would go to like HR about, or, you know, I don't know. Yeah. So it's hard to gauge.
Yeah. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I had one more question for you. I live in a college town in West Virginia, and we have a Chabad here. And I was so fascinated when I first moved here, and I saw what they were doing for Shabbos meals. Their Shabbos meals were super quick. It was like maybe an hour, maybe most. And I asked the rabbi, and they're also early, no matter the season, if it's summer or winter. And I asked the rabbi about that, and he told me, he goes, I need to meet the students where they are. And he's like, I know they're all going to want to go to the bars on Friday night. And the Chabad house, by the way, is on the same block as all the bars, so it's in walking distance. Convenient. And he's like, I know they all going to go to. So he's like, if I have a 3-hour Shabbos meal, then no one's going to show up because I'm conflicting. It's they're conflicting with the other things they have planned for that night. But he said he gets a lot more people if he can just, if people pre-game the bar by going to the Shabbos meal first for an hour. So he gets all the kids, he can say Kiddush, he can say Dvar Torah, and they can have a home-cooked Shabbos meal and have that experience and still be able to go to the bars. I just found that fascinating. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I certainly agree as an educator, right? I mean, I've been a college instructor for years, and I certainly think as an educator, meeting students where they're at is always key, no matter like what subject you're teaching. I also think that there's this tension, and it's funny because this brings me back to the days when my husband and I were NCSY directors. So I sometimes have to, I put that hat back on too. There's not such a huge difference between college students and high school students in some of these areas. But I think there's also an acceptance that a lot of us have to have when we do this kind of work, that there's quality and there's quantity. And there's the idea of just getting 300 students in the door and maximizing the impact by getting 300 students. And then there's also the 10 students who actually might long term end up having a strong connection to Judaism and being able to invest in those folks. When my husband and I were NCSY directors, we were like infamous for like attracting the lame nerdy kids. But I will just say they all ended up like really living strong Jewish lives. Many of them are married and have kids now. And so balancing that with like, the cool NCSY director or the cool Chabad on campus or Hillel person who's like, yeah, but like, all the cool folks in this class come to my Shabbat meal or whatever. I think is a good skill set. And in general, I think if you do this work, not tying your own sense of like self-worth or, productivity to the students is healthy in general, also as a professor. But I think that there's a balance, and sometimes you can figure that out intuitively. And sometimes you just have to say, I'm really going to find out which students want this and how to orient this towards these students. And I think what I'm hearing from the Chabad director you're talking about is this intuitive desire to just do something big every week, get as many people as possible, get them in the door, and then move them out. And I think there's also value in doing the hard work of figuring out, okay, which students actually want something more, and can we provide more for them too?
Tailor making something specifically for them, for a smaller group, maybe.
Yeah, and being okay with that. Like being okay with the fact that once a month you're going to have a 3-hour Shabbat meal that only 15 people are going to show up to.
Yeah.
Right. Or lunch and learn or challah baking or some other event besides Friday night.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Hannah, thank you so much. This has been super informative and interesting, and looking forward to your next piece on maybe a related topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. And I put the link for anyone who's interested. I put the link to Hannah's latest column in the comment section of this video, so you can click on it and read it for yourself. Thanks so much, Hannah.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
See ya. So we want to try something new to close out this week's show. We want to kind of do like our wins and fails of the week. And Hannah Pollock, the Forward's archivist, came up with a cute Yiddish way to frame this. So we're going to try it out and see what people think. We're calling it the tzaddik of the week. That's like Yiddish for the righteous person of the week. And righteous, good person? I don't know. Yeah. Holy person. And then nudnik of the week is kind of like the opposite of that.
The obnoxious man or woman. Yeah. Who's our nudnik of the week? Benyamin?
Our nudnik of the week, I want to nominate. This was a story we published, we wrote about in this morning's newsletter. If you're not already subscribing to our newsletter, go to forward.com and sign up. But we had a story this morning about a woman named Lena Epstein. She's a politician. She's running to be the chair of the Michigan Republican Party right now. And she's run for other offices before, and she's always talked about growing up and her Jewish roots in the Detroit Jewish community. And she came out this week at a event, and she said she had been baptized and is now, and I'm quoting, a Jewish messianic believer of Christ. So she came out this week and said she's now a messianic Jew. Some
also
people
known
who follow her. Well, yeah. Some people who follow her career are not too surprised, because she's been involved with she's invited messianic rabbis to other events, most notably after the Tree of Life shooting in 2018. Right. She was at an event with then Vice President Mike Pence, and this messianic rabbi came on stage. Rabbi, put that in quotes, came on stage to give a prayer. So, it reminded me, it had echoes. The first thing when I read it had echoes of the whole Representative George Santos scandal.
Yeah.
Right. You say you're Jewish and then you're not Jewish, you're Jewish. I don't know. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, my problem is less with whatever Lena Epstein wants her personal religious beliefs to be, and more with the way that attempting to mainstream Messianic
Yeah.
Judaism really affects actual Jews. I think pretty much across the aisle, one of the few things that Jews agree on is that Jesus is like a line too far for us.
Right.
Particularly, I grew up in the Bible Belt, and to a lot of evangelical, the idea that, you know, Jews are just Christians who haven't gotten all the way yet is very common. And having someone who's a prominent candidate who basically legitimizes that view that, you know, Jews are just potential Christians, or you can still be Jewish and, you know, abandon the beliefs of Judaism in this specific way, I think it's very harmful. Again, she can believe in whatever she wants, but don't misrepresent yourself as a member of a tribe when you're breaking the one thing that we all universally agree on. But
Right. So
yeah.
let's end on a happier note. Who do you
Yes,
want
I'm
to?
nominating-
Who is your tzaddik of the week? Yeah.
Tzaddik of the week is Zev Remer, an Orthodox basketball player who is now at a Christian school. The quote from the piece this week that we ran on him was, "I thought to myself, if I were in a religious place where I was comfortable, what would I be accomplishing there?" And he's 20. And he's, you know, I don't know anything about his personal life, but the fact that he is, you know, star athlete for this school, proudly being Jewish, seems like is open and approachable. I think that can only help when you have someone in an environment without a lot of Jews, when the first Jew they meet is like this exciting, happy person. That feels good for the Jews. California Lutheran University. Yes, that's where he attends.
Yeah, he goes, and he's a starting point guard, I think, and he's proudly wearing his yarmulke, you know, on the court, which is, you know, talking about Jews on college campuses, you know, that he's being proudly Jewish. I think he's certainly a great nominee for the tzaddik of the week this week.
Yes. Cool.
All right. Well, I think we are going to wrap things up here. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to try to do this every Thursday around lunchtime, East Coast time. And check us out in between episodes at forward.com. You can subscribe to our morning newsletter to get all the news at forward.com. And Laura, I guess have fun at the Anti-Semitism Summit later today.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Take care, Benyamin.
All right. See ya.